Not only did the Seattle Kraken win the Winter Classic against the Vegas Golden Knights, but they nailed the setup on every front. We'll talk about everything that went into the sweet setup for the Seattle Kraken, as well as the game itself and why both teams are trending in the complete opposite directions right now. On today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, we are your team every day.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into a Western Conference Tuesday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. We are your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, we recap the Winter Classic from head to toe, including a ton on the setup, the game itself, and we'll also talk about both teams that were involved because they're trending in different directions here as we move into 2024. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, and one half of the dynamic duo here on Western Conference Tuesday is Nick Morgan of Locked On Predators. Joins me here today, and Nick, it's 2024 now, and that means completely different things for both the Seattle Kraken and the Vegas Golden Knights. But before we get to them, let's talk about the Winter Classic in general, because holy cow, the Seattle Kraken nailed it from pretty much every aspect in yesterday's game.
You know, when a game starts with your team walking under a tunnel of dudes dressed like Pike Place fishmongers, throwing fish back and forth on top of your team, you know the presentation's only going to go uphill from there, right? You know that's an A+ start.
Yeah, you're destined for greatness when you incorporate those elements, and you know, it just every part of the setup was fantastic, and Seattle really paid attention to the little details of their setup on the field formerly known as Safeco Field. I missed what it is now called.
T-Mobile Park?
I think you're correct there. But so they had the ice out in the outfield. But I loved the fact that they really dug into the Kraken theme all throughout what would be the infields by having the what looked like really choppy, dark water, and the players walked out onto the ice on makeshift docks, and you had little bits of Kraken throughout. They had in one part of kind of the backdrop, they had a pirate ship that had capsized and had Kraken tentacles coming out of it. Like whoever was in charge of what we saw visually leading up to the sheet of ice was just brilliant. Like every aspect of it was just looked fantastic.
I don't know if that is Seattle or if that's the NHL. But whoever it was, kudos. And I will say that I am glad that teams are pumping a lot of money into, sort of their in-arena entertainment team. I'm not sure if it's like the marketing or just in-house production or who it is, but you see a lot of teams investing a lot in in-game presentation and in between periods things. The other team playing, the Vegas Golden Knights, look what they've done with some of their great pre-game stuff. We talk about it feeling like a Vegas show. Seattle, we know we've seen some good stories about how much they've invested in their team. and some of their good like pregame videos and introduction, and the team skating out with the giant Kraken horn coming, or the tentacle, or whatever you call a Kraken's appendage coming out of the ice. And it's fun. And I think it adds to the atmosphere as well. And you saw it last night where it was just, it felt like a fun atmosphere. However, the game went, if you were there to kind of take in the sights, the sounds, the experience of just sort of being in the building, it was fun. And as much as we come down on, NHL's, marketing strategy and stuff like that, they, I think, absolutely nailed this one. So I'm not sure who it was. I'm not sure if the NHL had a big hand in it. I don't know if it was mostly Seattle's baby, but whoever it was deserves a lot of credit.
Yeah, and there were other things that happened throughout the game too that I thought were really good, were great as well. Like whoever decided to incorporate the Cocoa Cup into the game itself, so you have like the MVP of the Winter Classic. I thought that was a great touch. You keyed in on the fish toss that happened. How about the pyrotechnics too? Like there were those sweet photos of Seattle players walking in with the flames shooting up out of the dock. I was blown away by what we saw. But this is kind of a Seattle staple, is that they really have cornered the market on the maritime theme for their sports teams. They've got the Seahawks, they've got the Mariners, they've got the Kraken. And I thought it was cool too that they incorporated those guys into the game too. They had all the different Seattle greats from previous seasons sports wise. They had Matt Hasselbeck there. They had Marshawn Lynch as kind of their brand ambassador throughout the lead up to the game. It's just Seattle, I feel it feels like, is a market that really gets like how to hype up, how to amp up their sports teams by kind of just going with this consistent theme that plays throughout all three of them.
Would have been a great place to announce the Supersonics are coming back.
Oh,
if there is one thing missing from last night's game, it was that. Here's a question for you, Seth.
sure.
We talked about the good visuals of the Winter Classic. We talked about how fun it was. The pyrotechnics. A lot of people who were there thought it was a well done event. But the biggest tweet I've seen from hockey fans over the past 48 hours was, "Oh yeah, the Winter Classic. Forgot about that." What do we think about the Winter Classic kind of as an entity right now?
I think we talked about this a few months ago, in that if you want this to still have the major appeal, I think they've got to keep it to something that's not as frequent, because they've got the stadium series, they've got other angles that also incorporate these outdoor games. And if I recall correctly, I think what I had suggested is that they turn this into a weekend thing where you have two games. You've got two games that happen in a particular market, and you incorporate your team into one of the games with maybe one of their hated rivals, or some sort of a game that's going to have some meaning to it. And then you take and maybe you do like the Stanley Cup final rematch or something like that, something that's going to draw appeal and is going to turn it into kind of a spectacle thing for an entire weekend. I think one of the things, if I'm being super honest, that had kind of pulled away from yesterday's game was the fact that they were competing against those New Year's Day bowl games in college football. Yeah. That is that's been a college football thing forever. And so, you can't eliminate having games on holidays because other sports do it, but I think it's hard to compete with all the people that are going to be watching college football literally all day. I mean, that's what I did is I had the game and I recorded it and I watched it later. But that I think that's part of kind of what has pulled away from viewership outside of the diehards. Like, you're going to have those people that watch hockey over everything else, no matter what. But if you really want to try to use this to pull in the non-regular viewers, you got to find a way to kind of up the ante, I think, a little bit. And you got to find a way to just make it so that it's not competing against some of those pinnacle things that you typically get on, especially New Year's Day.
And that's the point, isn't it? To try to pull in those casual fans and kind of make it a once a year event, like a must see thing. I mean, that was sort of the pitch back when, we had Crosby's big moment with in the shootout with the snow coming down, and the first Red Wings Blackhawks at Wrigley Field. It just kind of felt like sort of a must see event, whether you're a hockey fan, whether you're just a casual sports fan. And it seems like it's kind of lost that luster a little bit. And maybe part of it is just that this is going on every year now. Maybe there's a lot of casual sports fans that are going to be like, wait, when the hell did Seattle get an NHL team? There's going to be a lot of, casual sports fans watching college bowl games all day. I mean, Seth, like, how can you not watch a Cheez-It get a massage? That's must see TV right there. And and we can talk about this more in a future show, but it just seems like the interest is way down. And I'm not exactly sure if you're the NHL, the best way to fix that, but there's a lot working against them with that New Year's Day slot. So I don't know, I don't want to say have fewer outdoor games, like eliminate the Stadium Series or the Heritage Classic, but it feels like they need to kind of find a way to make this more of a once a day thing. And maybe that starts with just kind of changing out when it happens.
Yeah, I think that would be a good place to start. I mean, because that's something that I have always known, like even before I was a fan of hockey, was that New Year's Day you just sit and watch college football all day. Like, it's on all the time. And so I there are a few questions I think to that need to be answered about the Winter Classic, and I think part of it includes the frequency of those outdoor games, like you said. But those are some questions that the NHL might want to start to take a peek at. But we'll see if they do. Now we're going to kind of keep it in a Winter Classic theme here by focusing on the two teams that played, because not only did Seattle nail the visual aspects of the Winter Classic, but they also nailed the game too. And we'll talk about the team that ended up on the wrong end of a 3-0 shutout loss, the Vegas Golden Knights, because the cards are starting to come up on the wrong end for the Vegas Golden Knights here recently. And so we'll talk about if there is trouble in Sin City when we continue today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast after this. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by Game Time. If you are looking to live more in the moment here in 2024, you have probably decided to spontaneously head to a sporting event, depending on where your teams are at in the standings, maybe a concert at your favorite sports venue, or even just going out to dinner and seeing a comedy show after. But there's nothing worse than the same day ticket buying experience. Either tickets are too expensive the day of, or you buy your tickets and it turns out your view is obstructed when you get to the venue. Game Time is here to make your ticket buying experience as stress-free as possible. Game Time offers last-minute deals as well as views from every seat in the venue. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. Once again, we are your team every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day throughout 2024. Seth Toupal joined by Nick Morgan. And Nick, it's been a little bit of a rough go for the Vegas Golden Knights over the last few games. They've lost 6 of 8. And they ended up getting shut out by the Seattle Kraken, who are suddenly red hot. How concerned do we need to be about the Vegas Golden Knights here as we move into 2024?
Well, here's some numbers. Since November 1st, and this is tweeted out by Big Head Hockey, since November 1st, Vegas, in terms of points, 18th in the entire NHL. So this has been a sort of a trend in the wrong direction for a while. Now, of course, they started red hot, so they banked a lot of points. And if they check the standings, they're still second place in their division. Right behind Vancouver, who's red hot right now. Not having Adin Hill, who might be your front runner for the Vezina right now, who he's been out for the past couple of weeks with an injury. That certainly doesn't help matters much. Yeah, I don't know. Like it's tough to say whether they're crashing back down to earth because we've seen them get hot before. But this is now 2 months in which they've just kind of been okay. Like not terrible. Like they're not like the Chicago Blackhawks or anything like that. But it's been 2 months where they've just been okay. And considering what they did in the postseason last year, what they did to start this season, maybe that's a little bit concerning.
Yeah, I look at it as, you lose a goalie the caliber of Adin Hill, who's having a massive season so far for the Golden Knights. Goals against average under 2, and a guy that we talked about at length in the offseason and into this season as well. And it's one of those things too where it's the timing is frustrating because you just get him back. Reading on ESPN here that he missed the first 7 games of December with a lower body injury and lasted just 6 minutes, 25 seconds in his return against Ottawa on December 17th. So it's one of those, you almost have a sigh of relief because, okay, we get him back. We got Hill back, and now we can kind of get ourselves back up to the top of the list. But then he gets injured again. And so you're dealing with some untested goalies, as Bruce Cassidy said here in the article. Jiri Patera has been playing a much bigger role since Hill was injured, got Logan Thompson back. And so it's a situation for Vegas here where you just have to kind of weather the storm. I think they really haven't had a stretch like this so far this season. I mean, they've had stretches where they have struggled a little bit, but this is, I think, the first real test of the season for them. But this is where having a guy like Bruce Cassidy as your coach that's what you fall back on. You fall back on, the tightness of the group, the closeness of the group, and you just have to lean on that to weather some of these stretches. And look, it's not like they have fallen out of the playoff picture or anything. They're still tied with the Vancouver Canucks for most points in the Pacific Division. They're tied with Colorado and Vancouver for most points in the Western Conference. So it's not like Vegas has lost anything substantial in this little skid that they have been on here recently. It's just, I think, a good reminder for them that it's a long season, and it's a good reminder for us too. It's a long season, and every team, even the best teams in the NHL, they go through little stretches like this. And at the end of the day, games here don't matter as much as the ones in, say, April, where you're trying to get yourself on track to get into the postseason, and that's where the big prize is. So as long as Vegas keeps themselves where they need to be, I think they'll be fine.
Yeah. And if there's, if Vegas needs inspiration, they can just look at last year's Vegas Golden Knights team, because the same thing happened where it was they got off to this hot start. Then sort of, around December, some injuries popped up. They started getting cold. They got red hot again, got a little bit cold again, then finished red hot. And, can we know how that happened? So, and I remember going into that playoff thinking, okay, do we really know who the real Vegas Golden Knights are? So, every team goes through that. I look at the standings right now, and every team kind of up there right now, has kind of had a stretch, like maybe a 1 week stretch of, okay, what are we doing here? It's just, as you mentioned, I think the normal course of a hockey season. So yeah, not too worried about Vegas at the moment. Maybe more impressed, Seth, with the Seattle Kraken.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the suddenly surging Seattle Kraken on a 9-game point streak. They have won 5 in a row, and a large reason as to why is the guy who was between the pipes against the Vegas Golden Knights yesterday. So we'll talk about the surging Seattle Kraken to finish today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, the NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And that's because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. There's no better place to jump in on the action than FanDuel, because the app is easy to use and there are so many different ways to win, like the live same game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab, so you can search for, maybe a specific player or a specific stat or money line. You can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, which is the best way to find popular parlays, and much, much more, including traditional things like spreads, player props, and the money line. So visit FanDuel/LockedOn and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner in the NFL.
Final segment of this first Western Conference Tuesday of 2024 here on the Locked On NHL podcast. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Seth Toupal and Nick Morgan here with you. And Nick, it has been a surge for the Seattle Kraken. We've keyed in on them throughout the first part of this season as a team that I think we were a little surprised to see them struggling as much as they are, and then the injury bug hit. Philip Grubauer knocked out of the lineup, and it just looked like a Kraken team that needed somebody to step up and get them back on track. And lo and behold, Joey Daccord, who had a shutout in yesterday's win against the Vegas Golden Knights, he has been sensational for Seattle, and is a huge reason as to why they have points in 9 straight games and have won 5 in a row, and have suddenly thrown themselves back in to the postseason conversation. As of right now, just 1 point behind the Arizona Coyotes for the final wild card spot in the Western Conference. So, Nick, is it as simple as better goaltending for Seattle to get them back into postseason conversation?
Yeah, I would say pretty simple. And also shout out to Joey Daccord, because, good guy, good journeyman, NHL player. And I was a little surprised to learn that was the first shutout in Winter Classic history. This game's been going on for since 2007, 2008, and that's the first shutout. according to the NHL. So, yeah, shout out to Joey Daccord. Yeah, I mean, the fact that he is kind of carrying the team right now, like 919 save percentage, I think he started the year around 900, so that should kind of tell you just how well he's been doing. 2 goals or fewer in his last 4 starts, including a good 43 saves on 44 shots performance against the Kings. About a week and a half ago, which we talked about the Kings being a hot team. I think that was kind of a statement game for him. And also, like, let's shout out in the past week, Chris Driedger. Remember him? Is maybe the goalie heir apparent in Seattle before a very bad injury, I think, kind of derailed his season last year. He came back into the lineup his first NHL game in over a year and a half, and gets a 38 save win against Calgary. So Seattle's goaltending is carrying the load right now, and it's a good thing because you kind of look up and down their lineup, and there's not a whole lot of, let's say, consistency from the Seattle Kraken this season as compared to maybe last year's team.
Yeah, you don't have those guys that have routinely stepped up to lead this team to wins. I mean, look at who scored in the game yesterday. Eli Tolvanen with his 10th. Will Borgen scored his first goal of the season, and then Yanni Gord with his 5th. And so that's going to be another key for Seattle too, is that if you're not getting one guy that kind of takes the lead, you're going to have a bunch of guys that step up and are answering the call on a nightly basis. And it seems like they are getting that. We're starting to hear Matty Beniers' name a little more frequently than we previously had, and he's a player that certainly has struggled to start the season. But if they can just find, like they had last year, a couple of players that they can consistently lean on offensively, and if they get something similar to this for goaltending, they're obviously not going to get goaltending at this level all season. But if they can get something close to this and can get enough offense to lead them through on the days where the goaltending isn't as crisp, it's a Seattle team that I think is capable of going on a similar run as they did last year. The question is just going to be, how long can Daccord keep this going? How long can they get this between the pipes to keep them in that playoff hunt?
The big thing for the Kraken, the big reason that they did what they did last year was 2 things: depth scoring, and defense, team defense, because goaltending wasn't that great last year either, and neither one of them have really been there this year. I mean, they do have 15 players with 10 plus points, which I guess is good, but their leading scorer is Vince Dunn with 31 points, and that's never a good sign when one of your defensemen is a sub 1 point a game pace and leading your team in scoring. And we mentioned, in terms of team defense, Matty Beniers, Jared McCann, those were kind of, the top line last year. I think Jordan Eberle was with them. Matty Beniers is minus 15 this season, and we know plus minus isn't the end all be all indicator when it comes to how well you're defending out there, but minus 15 means you are out there for a lot more goals against than goals that you're creating. And I think that's been a big problem this year, is you had guys out there sort of winning their battles, whether it's on the back end, or in the defensive zone, or, being able to win puck battles in the neutral zone. That was Seattle's bread and butter last year, and it just hasn't happened this year. So, if that, especially the top of the lineup, guys like Beniers and Jaden Schwartz and Jared McCann can kind of pick up the two-way game a little bit, They should maybe get a little bit better because I still think the defense, the actual blue liners have been good. Vince Dunn has been good. I know Will Borgen's had a good defensive season. So maybe if that picks up, if the top guys can start winning some of their puck battles, I think Seattle can go in the right direction, especially if they have goaltending like what Daccord's been able to do the past month or so.
Yeah, lean on that goaltending as long as you have it, and then lean on the offense when the goaltending starts to go a little cool. But it's great to see Seattle back. It was a big weekend for them with the Winter Classic, but then also with their play as well. And so kudos to Seattle for matching on both ends of the Winter Classic here this year. That is going to do it for today's episode of Locked On NHL. We thank everybody for tuning in as you do each and every day to the Locked On NHL podcast, and we've got plenty more coming up for you here throughout 2024. So make sure to stay tuned. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to hit this video with a like before you head out for the day. And you can follow along with our wide range of Locked On NHL hosts all throughout the week with new episodes here every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.